Welcome to the Highly Recommended, Stories of People Worth Knowing. I'm Becky Perry, and every episode I sit down with someone who is quietly extraordinary, the kind of person you'd never know about unless you took the time to listen, because the most remarkable stories aren't always the loudest ones. My guest today holds a PhD in history from UT Austin, competed on the Belize national volleyball team, was named Miss Belize Beauty runner-up, and spent part of her PhD inside the AI industry, training the models that are changing how we understand the truth. She is now teaching the next generation how to tell the difference between what's real and what isn't. In a world that needs that now more than ever, she's going back to the primary source. Dr. Alina Scott is highly recommended. Dr. Alina Scott, welcome to the Highly Recommended.
Thank you so much for having me. This is so exciting.
Girl, thanks for being here. We're in May. God, we just hit June now. So you're technically a year out from finishing your PhD.
Yeah.
Lecturing now at UT. How is it to have a year out now and seeing the other students kind of going through what you went through last year?
I can't encourage finishing up the degree enough, getting out into the real world, living life, applying what you've learned to your community and your life. I think right out of the degree, I had been so hyper-focused on getting it done that by the time I was done, I didn't really know what to do with myself. I felt like I was just thrust into the universe.
Done now.
Yeah,
Get
but
on,
now that
never
it's
have to go
done,
back to it.
It's kind of exhilarating because, my big goal, I've completed it, and now I feel like I can do anything.
Would you ever go back and learn more?
Probably. I could see myself doing a JD or maybe another specialized PhD or master's degree.
Girl, you would.
Yeah, now that I've seen it and I've made it through and know what it takes to be done with it, I think I could do it.
Yeah, I love that.
Do I want to do it? No, but
not right now. You're like, give me a break. But I could see you doing a JD.
Probably.
Well, okay, let's roll back then. I want to talk about kind of what made you who you are, what brought you to this point that you're now sharing this knowledge with students. You're originally from Belize, born and raised. Take me back to, you grew up in the Belizean rainforest, right? Helping your family run tourism. Tell me about that world, because I know you were pretty inspired by that world before you got into where you are now.
Yeah, I always tell people that I study history because I was surrounded by tour guides growing up. And that's partially true. It's also like family curiosity and being from a place like Belize where it is culturally rich, historically rich, resource rich, but there's also very real economic issues, very real public safety issues. And so it was, being part of the tourism industry was also formative because it allowed me to have access to people from other parts of the world that were coming and exploring our culture for themselves. And then leaving. And then I never saw them again. So
they were, didn't feel like the same investment as you had.
Yeah.
What was it exactly that your family was doing in the tourism industry?
Yeah. My dad was managing resorts. My mom was also managing resorts. And then she got into teaching. And she was teaching at the university
some of this is
level.
Where this comes from.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Our family home was a place of sort of like geared towards their schedules, my parents' schedules, which was always tied up in, how many guests do we have at the hotel? What dinners are we serving at the hotel? Should the kids come to the hotel? But yeah, being a part of the tourism industry was interesting. It took up a lot of time. So parents weren't really at home as much as a lot of my friends.
They're running a business and hosting people.
Exactly.
And giving them experiences and everything.
Exactly.
Oh, how cool. So you also got exposure to other cultures through the people that came, but then you were also sharing your culture with it. And you mentioned the tour guides. What was it about the tour guides that inspired you?
I think it was storytelling. It was storytelling from experience, storytelling from lived experience, from heritage, from a place beyond the words of the story. I think one of the most striking things is hearing about the history of a place from somebody who cares about it deeply. And yeah, I think that's what a lot of Belizean tour guides do really well. Beyond being incredibly personable and charismatic and great storytellers, they're speaking from a place of passion and
There's
heritage.
a cultural connection there, I would think, because you could go to a museum and learn about a country's history, but it's not the same as being in it with the people who are living it, right?
But also, I think the museum is a great space to learn history.
Sure, yeah.
The Belize Museum is actually in an old jail that was built by enslaved people who were brought to Belize and forced to labor to build this jail that then imprisoned a lot of Belizean people. And that is now the home of the Belize Museum in Belize City. And I think it's really cool to see that history evolve and that place evolve and become sort of the home of this cultural heritage and this history.
Wow. Okay. So mom is Belizean. Dad is?
My dad is American. He's from Michigan and Portland. He moved to Belize in the Peace Corps, met my mom, had myself and my brother, and couldn't leave.
And the rest is history.
And the rest is history.
Interesting. Okay, so when somebody's coming to visit Belize, let's say they're staying at your family's hotel and they're, booking excursions and tours and things like that, what are some of the things that people come to visit and see?
A lot of people come for the beaches, which are great.
Right.
They come for the coral reef, which is the largest barrier reef in this hemisphere, the largest living barrier reef in the world. There's also the blue pool.
Is it? Bigger than the Great Barrier Reef?
It's the largest living barrier
that one's
reef.
dying, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Wow.
Sorry, we don't. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating.
They also come for the Maya archaeological sites. The word used to be ruins, but we've sort of shifted away from using ruins to talk about these cultural sites.
Why is that? Is it out of respect, I'm assuming?
Out of respect, and also to I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. Out of respect and to not sort of limit these cultures that are very much alive to the past.
Okay. Because ruin would signify that
the culture is gone.
It's done.
There's sort of an end, a termination, and that's something that's very common, especially when referring to Indigenous people, sort of imagining the present moment without them when Indigenous people
are still
very much alive, very much living cultures, breathing cultures. And so in a lot of these Maya archaeological sites in Belize, their descendants remain in the area, living traditionally or not traditionally.
And some of them are the tour guides, right?
And some of them are the tour guides, exactly. Telling stories from personal experience, from their family, who's been in the area for centuries.
And so the correct term is archaeological site then?
Maya site, yeah.
Maya site, okay, not ruins.
Yeah.
Nope. It's not a ruin.
It's not a ruin, it's a site.
Love that. Okay, cool. So some of your knowledge, just history has been kind of baked in from the beginning. Switching gears a little bit, in your youth still in Belize, you competed on the U19, U21 national volleyball team. What did that feel like to represent a country, and what did that teach you before any classroom or set of academics did?
Yeah. Volleyball is really important to me. It was really important to me in high school when I started because I think I was just searching for community. I was searching to not feel alone in the world, and being a part of a team, being a part of a community that was growing together and learning together and failing and picking themselves back up and doing it again. It taught me perseverance. It taught me determination. It taught me how to work as part of a team and how to learn from someone with more knowledge than you. It taught me the value of repetition and doing things over and over again until you get it right or close to right. But then representing Belize outside of the country gave me a sense of pride for not necessarily the nationalism or like national pride, but in all of the individual people who supported this team, whether whether it was before we left or after we came back, and they sort of saw the impact of what we were doing. We lost a lot of games.
Oh,
And
yeah, really?
we were not a great team early on.
I'm sure that built some character.
It built a lot of character. It was very humbling. The team won the, I think, first place a few years after I left and moved to the States.
So you kind of helped build getting them to that place.
I was a part of it, but, the girls that won were the girls that won. I wasn't a part of that official team, but it was sort of like being a part of this community where we're working towards doing better and representing our country more fully and more completely. That was really rewarding. And I don't think I realized it until I left and I didn't have that.
What were some of the competitions that you competed in for Belize?
We competed the Kadikader games. We played in, I believe.
Kadikader, what does that stand for?
It's a Central American tournament, a sports group.
So what are some of the other countries that are in there?
It's like a mini Olympics for Central America. So at the end of primary school, early high school, I forgot what the age cap is, but different representatives of different countries in Central America, because it's limited to Central America, send teams for track, for volleyball, for basketball.
Okay.
And everybody competes over the same weekend.
That reminds me a little bit of like the Commonwealth Games.
Yeah.
But for Central America.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what are some of for those that aren't geographically inclined?
Oh, yeah.
Some of the countries that you guys competed against, like actual games that you played against. I know other maybe countries participated, but maybe weren't in the tournament format for you to eventually compete against. Like which games, who did you play against? How did it go?
The top two teams in Central America when I was playing were Guatemala and Costa Rica. They just have the budget for it. And we were also playing Honduras, Nicaragua, Panama. Who else?
And all of those countries, their native language is Spanish.
Yeah.
Right? So you guys probably had a little bit of a benefit there in that the language is different. So when you're speaking on the court,
right,
the opponent doesn't know what you're calling, what plays you're doing, stuff like that, right? What's the language in Belize?
The language in Belize is English. That said, we were all staying in the same dorm. So our room was right next to the Guatemalan team. Their room was right next to the Costa Rican team.
Okay.
We were all sort of staying together. And even though it was a competitive environment, there was still collegiality and friendliness.
Yeah.
We found ways to communicate. Most of Belize is bilingual, speaking English and Spanish.
Okay.
So there were ways for us to communicate. My Spanish isn't that great, but some of my teammates had better Spanish and were more confident practicing it.
You speak English, obviously, but conversational in Spanish. You also speak a third language. What language is that?
It's Belizean Creole. And there was this movement in Belize in the early 2000s to put Belizean Creole in conversation with a lot of the other like pidgin-descended languages that exist, or Creole language dialects that exist across the world. There was an activist and writer who remains a part of the education system in Belize, Silvana Uds, who started the process of creating a dictionary, a Creole English dictionary, so that these words, that limitation to calling Creole a language was gone. There is a grammatical structure. There is a dictionary that defines the words, and there is a set spelling for each of these words.
And how did you find out about her?
She was a friend of her family was a friend of her family. We're friends with our family.
Yeah.
And, Belize is really small. It's sort of impossible to not know who people are if, by last name or who their family is.
Everybody's somebody's doing something that, important to preserve a language.
Yeah, exactly.
You're going to hear about it, and it's a language you speak, right?
Exactly. And it's something that I've come back to over the years as an adult, sort of learning this thing.
So possibly another inspiration for your passion of history.
Absolutely.
Okay, so for people that have never heard Belizean Creole, can you say a sentence for us? Whatever, even if it's hi, how are you? Or, we're sitting at a table talking or just something.
Sure. My favorite Belizean proverb.
Oh, I would love a proverb.
It's not just Belizean. It could also be Jamaican, is OneOneCocoa basket,
Okay.
which means essentially little by little. If you do something little by little, you'll accomplish the goal.
love
Cocoa,
that.
one cocoa at a time will fill the basket.
Oh, I love that. This is
Yeah.
making a lot of sense now
Yeah.
because your Substack is OneOneCocoa.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask you about that later, but now I
Cool.
understand why you named it that. I was going to ask you what the title came from, but it's a proverb. Oh, I love that. That's super cool.
One cocoa full basket.
Okay, last question on volleyball.
Mhm.
What do you like? How important do you think it is? Obviously, it was very formative for you, but how important do you think it is for young women to play sports?
It was so rewarding for me to get that experience outside of myself in high school. I think it's really important for women to play sports because of all the things that it teaches you. But I think I can advocate for the community side, for the team building side, for the sort of personal determination that comes from watching yourself fail at something and then achieve it.
Oh, I love that.
Watching yourself do something until you get it right. I think it proved to me that I really could do anything I set my mind to. Sometimes your body doesn't necessarily want to,
especially when you're in the growth phase and you're like, wait, I woke up one morning and it's just not clicking.
I've never been a super great jumper. Like, I don't have a great vert, but I can watch myself get better at passing. I can watch myself serve several aces in a row and feel good about what I'm contributing to the team and the overall goal that we're all working towards. And that's exciting. I think not just women, anyone can, benefit from that experience.
Are you still playing?
I'm still playing. I'm in a rec league. I'm in a couple rec leagues, and my teams are so wonderful. I think playing on a women's net is so much better and so much more fun and technical, and I'm enjoying being a part of an all-womenens team.
I was going to say, is it co-ed? No, it's all women's.
Yeah,
okay.
I have a co-ed team and an all-women's team.
Okay, cool. So on the co-ed team, it's on a men's net.
Yeah.
Ah, bummer.
Which is fine. I feel like I can handle myself.
It's a little bit more skill-based.
Yeah.
I would think on a co-ed, because there's been a couple situations where you could play on a women's net, but the guys can only hit out of the back row.
I haven't been on any of those.
Net. Yeah. I think that happens in beach a bit.
Yeah.
But
I tried sand, and I like sand, but I still think indoor is where my heart is.
Yeah. There's more team to it.
Yeah.
There's more people on the team. Love that. Okay, so you went from Belizean rainforest to Bethany, Oklahoma for your undergrad. What was that arrival like? That's a different world.
So 2 of my great uncles actually went to school at Southern Nazarene University, where I ended up going for undergrad. They were the first Black men to ever attend this university.
Wow.
My great uncle, when he got accepted to SNU, it was then called, I think, Bethany Christian College.
Wow.
Or Bethany College, and the president of the university actually sent his roommate a letter asking him if he wanted to be roommates with a Black man because the roommate was white. Yeah, and so it was...
Wow, like a request permission type.
Yeah.
Wow, different times.
Different times indeed, and it was in the 60s, and I found that out after I got there. This history of my family and
your initial motivation to go there was just knowing that you had family members that went there.
Yes.
But you didn't realize until after you got there that they were the first Black men to attend. And wow. Okay. So they didn't tell you ahead of time.
My great uncles had told me my grandfather's brothers, this is the Belizean side of the family, right? They had told me that they were, proud of their time there, which I really respect because they both worked really hard for what they were able to achieve there. And so I knew that there was a family legacy, but I wasn't fully aware of everything. And even after I became aware of everything, it didn't necessarily change how I felt about what I witnessed. I sort of saw it for myself.
Sure. So, okay, then what was that like? You arrive in Bethany, Oklahoma. It is not the rainforest. It is not multicultural.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
There's really great people in Bethany.
Yeah.
I didn't know until I got there that had previously been a sundown town, which is, Black people were encouraged to leave the township before the sun went down in the nighttime. I didn't know that until I got there. I was really motivated by my faith. My faith was super important to me around this time, and it was a private Christian school. I really thought that I could express myself, express my faith in this environment. We were all in early college, everybody's trying to figure it out. Around my second year at SNU, there was actually a blackface incident where a student in student leadership put blackface on, and that was sort of motivating my curiosity on the long history of the school, how I related to the school, how I related to this college experience.
How did the school handle that? What were the repercussions?
He was able to stay a student, but
Really?
I believe he was on leave from his student government position for a while, and then they eventually replaced him.
Wow. So that says a lot about the institution if you can do something like that and still remain admitted.
Yeah. It was a small school, about 2,000 students, including the master's programs.
Oh, wow. Including graduate programs. Okay.
So, yeah, pretty small school. Everybody lived on campus for the most part. What else? There was a sort of political movement among the students of color and allies on campus. And it was around the time of the Ferguson Uprising and a lot of these other Black Lives Matter movements. And we sort of saw that directly connected to what was happening at our school and the lack of protection for students. There was a petition that we drafted. We got signatures from current students and professors and alumni and a bunch of other people who were invested in the institution. It eventually resulted in the creation of the Multicultural Student Organization, which I was the head of for a year or two. And it sort of started this movement on campus to be more inclusive and create spaces for different types of people and for people to express themselves more completely and feel safe on campus.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So were you enrolled there during the Ferguson Uprising? For people that aren't aware about that, talk about that. What was that? What was it like being on campus during that?
Well, the Ferguson Uprising happened in Ferguson and Missouri, and it was basically protest movements in response to the killing of a Black man by police, I believe. Around the same time, there was also the Standing Rock movement. And so between 2015 and 2016, right in the middle of my college experience, there is a gathering of Indigenous peoples and allies in Standing Rock in protest of the pipeline that was being built through the reservation. And there's also the Black Lives Matter movement. And, in a place like Oklahoma, both of those issues are incredibly relevant to Oklahomans.
There's a significant Native population. Ferguson's not far.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So these are regional issues. These are issues that are relevant to the student body. And we were watching it all unfold long before the election of 2016, right? So being part of that community and witnessing this, it really opened my eyes to how the church was responding, how my institution was responding.
So it wasn't just a higher education institution that you feel like was responding in a certain way. It was also the church because they were a religious school.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, sorry, go ahead.
There were also ways that the school was applying Title IX regulations outside of, trans people in sports. They were using an exception in Title IX that allows you to essentially discriminate in hiring people who are LGBTQ plus for religious reasons.
What is the loophole in Title IX for that?
So Title IX is generally applied to women's sports.
Right. And for those that don't know, and for my familiarity, and you can correct me or add detail, Title IX was basically where the NCAA ruled and a law was made that you have to have the same number of scholarships for women as for men, which is why you see a lot of institutions that have, football teams, there's 80 plus scholarships. So women's rowing is an NCAA sport to level that, but men's rowing is not. Because women's rowing, you can get about 80 in there. You've got volleyball and gymnastics. It's rare to find the men's teams that have that because you've got to have some women's sports that level football. But what's the loophole for hiring in that?
I believe it was on the basis of religion. The school didn't necessarily have to hire people if they were LGBTQ plus.
Really?
Or because Title IX is also applied to sexual assault survivors. Like there's a Title IX office where you can report any sort of discrimination or violation in that area. And so there's different ways that Title IX is applied in higher ed. And sort of in the middle of the Ferguson Uprising and Standing Rock and all of these other things that were going on, there were individuals on campus who were LGBTQ plus and out who were getting letters from the president saying basically, chill out on how you're expressing your gender. There were people who were LGBTQ plus who were employed at the school who were also seeing how it was being applied, seeing this Title IX being applied negatively. But yeah, there were
multiple opportunities for this institution to use these incidents happening in society to stand up and say, hey, we protect these people. We don't agree with these things. We are an advocate for equality. And they did the opposite.
Yeah, I think
they tried.
Yeah, I think the institution tried in the way that it could. It's also a member of the Nazarene Church, which if anyone's familiar with the denominational differences between churches, they were sort of restricted in how they could express themselves as well. Do I think they did enough? No. That's my personal opinion.
Sure.
Someone else who's a part of the institution might differ with me.
Sure.
But there were several opportunities for them to do things differently, and they didn't.
And that's kind of where, do you feel like that's where your inspiration to lead this multicultural club on campus or group on campus came from? You weren't seeing enough being done?
Yeah, I was offered the position. They said basically you're going to have meetings with people. It wasn't necessarily defined. We put on events every month or so that I thought were pretty exciting, but nowhere near enough to what could have been done if there was proper institutional support.
Okay. And you were getting your undergrad in what?
My undergraduate degree was history with a minor in English.
Okay.
So all of my peers were football players who were going to coach high school.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just me and all of these football guys.
History is very broad. Like there's all sorts of different, periods of time. What history did you study specifically, or did you specialize in a certain period?
I think when I came to the States, because I was raised in Belize, I was so curious about my dad's side of the family and this part of myself this part of history that I wasn't given access to. Like Belizean history, we don't get taught a lot of it in schools. But when I got to the States, I was really curious about American history because I'd never gone that deep. I took an American history class in high school, but nothing beyond that. When I got here, I was curious about indigenous histories. I really loved the 19th century. I was really fascinated by Lincoln and the wartime politics of the Civil War, not necessarily the military conflicts. I already told my students this last semester, I was like, I really don't like talking about conflict and military clashes, but it's an essential part of a lot of what we're talking about in history.
Why don't you like it?
I just personally, as an individual, don't like violence.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't like, it's hard to tell these hard stories about death and about violence.
Avoidable things.
Things that seem avoidable, but also it's hard to capture the brutality. It's hard to capture the loss and the violence in a way that is complete and respectful. And, I think we can get into this place where we're criticizing and criticizing and criticizing in a way that's not productive. And I think it's very easy for war to be glamorized. And I just don't want to contribute to that.
So part of what I'm hearing you say, correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's tough to do it justice. It's tough to teach it in a way that respects the firsthand experience of the person who was in it. as well as not to get into the rabbit hole of constant, glamorization of it, because it is very like, whoa, which could like that polarization makes people, that interest becomes like a constant.
Yeah. And I do think, some public history spaces emphasize war.
Oh, okay.
And
what are some of those, you think?
I don't want to say the History Channel.
You said I don't want to say that. What is it about?
The History Channel can be productive.
What is it about some channels or the History Channel that does that?
Ooh, I don't want to talk about war.
It's okay. We don't have to.
Yeah,
we can move on.
I just think that it's really hard to do historical work rigorously in a way that benefits the public, but also doesn't glamorize war, doesn't glamorize violence, but is also rigorous and helps us live in the present more effectively and with a better understanding of the world. I think that's hard work to do.
That sounds like a fine line to balance.
And, not everybody is interested in a Ken Burns style deep dive. Sometimes it's easier to just tell the story. Sometimes it's easier to just tell the story.
Yeah, I get that. That must be really hard to balance, trying to, recount history without that glamorization. Part of your love for history comes from Lord of the Rings, from what I remember. So tell me about that. What is it about Lord of the Rings because that's not technically historical, it's sci-fi, right? It's fandom.
Yeah, the Lord of the Rings books were the first trilogy that I read, but The Hobbit I read first because my dad said it was his favorite book, and I was like, perfect, I'll read it. But I was in primary school. I was in, I think it's third grade, fourth grade.
Okay.
And I was walking around with The Hobbit, and then the Lord of the Rings movies started coming out. And I was like, I'm going to race the movies and finish all of these books. And so for years, I was just carrying around the Lord of the Rings books, trying to finish them before the movies came out. And I think the idea of Tolkien being a professor, of being a person who did experience war, was a part of wartime. And
for those that don't know, I don't know, what war was he in? Do you know?
Wasn't it the Second World War?
I know he wrote these probably 100 years ago, so that makes sense. First or second.
I haven't.
We'll look it up and we'll include it as a footnote.
Yeah, my understanding is that he wrote these books after experiencing these wartime experiences.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Losing friends, losing peers, and seeing it with his own eyes.
That's really interesting. I would think that recounting that experience in an alternate reality would make it easier to tell the story than making it real. That's so interesting. I did not know that.
But the idea of creativity and world building and something that's, literary and like sound cohesive across 4 different works. It was just really intriguing to me. And I was like, if I can write something that's half as good as this and be a professor, that sounds ideal.
Oh, is that a future potential dream to write a book? Like a sci-fi book like that?
No, not a sci-fi book. I think I've moved beyond that, but my mom keeps trying to get me to write historical fiction.
Okay.
We'll see if I do that. Because I really am like motivated and moved by actual things that happened in the past. And I think there's ways to make it more approachable to non-experts, and I think that's super helpful. But for me personally, I think I'm more moved by the concrete, and maybe that's being in higher ed for so long. Maybe that's a productive legacy of, all that I've learned throughout the years. But I really think the past is compelling.
Yeah.
And there are so many people that lived before us. There are so many examples of people who worked really hard and died in anonymity. Their lived testimony is encouraging enough for me. And I think if I can tell those stories effectively and honestly, I would be pretty satisfied.
Wow, I love that. What do you think is the biggest impact from being able to tell those stories? Like, what's the benefit of remembering history?
I was thinking about data the other day, and pardon me if this is a little out of
No,
the
please, we're
way.
flowing wherever it takes us.
I was thinking about data and how many data points we create for ourselves every day. Every selfie we take, every um, fitness tracker data
Yeah.
point. When you look to the past, which is sort of like, thousands of years and millions and millions of people who've lived before us, experienced life on this planet before us, there's a way to get access to their data points. And some people, they have more data points than others. Some people, there's just a first name on a plantation log. Some people wrote histories that are not part of the general historical dialogue because maybe they were a woman, or maybe they were Black, or maybe they were Native. There are different ways of documenting the past, and so those data points are different for different people at different times. And I think, it's worth it to explore those data points in this era because we are their legacy. We are a part of that world that they built. And I think it makes us better in the present moment, and it makes us better in the future as we're all actively, contributing to the history, the thing that will become the history.
Right.
In 20 years from now, this will be history, this
I love that.
conversation. So,
I love that,
yeah.
especially because I think you're right. People get so caught up in, what is it, biohacking, maximizing
Yeah.
it right now. And it's like, we already have the data points that you're trying to learn from yourself right now. It's already been shown to us.
Yeah.
So I love that.
Mhm.
Kind of on that note, during your PhD, you took a contract job training AI models for us to be able to have access to learn from the past. And without the specifics that you can't
Mhm.
share, what was it like to be a humanist inside AI development?
It helped that I wasn't alone. The role that I took included mostly people with higher ed degrees, PhDs, master's degrees. I think a master's degree was the minimum requirement for this position. And so every day I got up and I was applying these skills that I learned in the PhD to evaluating the effectiveness, factuality, conciseness.
What were they asking you guys to do? Are you allowed to share that?
We were on different teams that had different tasks, but our responsibility was to make sure that the model was getting smarter.
Okay.
So I started in, I believe, 2022 or 2023, one of those early years that GPT was coming out and other models were being introduced into popular culture. And so it was really exciting in the beginning. Like, here is this cool opportunity to be a part of something that's going to change the world. And as a graduate student who was trying to finish up my degree and needed a job, why not be on the, forefront of technology, something that's not accessible to a lot of historians, right? We're talking about the past all the time. We're looking at handwriting. We're looking at typewritten documents. We're not working on AI, right?
Right.
And so it was really exciting for me. I thought the idea of, a model being able to generate an image that looks like you based on just text, exhilarating. But sort of on the back end, it was people with higher ed degrees being exploited for their knowledge, and that knowledge sort of being transferred into these AI models without any sort of, reciprocal investment from the company that had hired us.
Right.
So it was, it's still an exploitative measure. And by the end of it, I became really disillusioned with AI's capabilities because I knew how limited these outputs are. Mind you, the models are much more advanced in terms of like coding and STEM because that will help the trainers and the engineers make the models better. The models will basically help make the models better. In terms of the humanities,
I was going to say that STEM stuff is constantly evolving, but the humanities and the history is what it is. So you can't really.
Or is it?
Well, tell me. I don't know. I guess I don't know.
It's not. I think one thing that models really struggle with is source hierarchy. And I heard it said by a PhD candidate at Harvard recently that, these models are aggregators of knowledge, not creators of knowledge. They don't have curiosity. They don't have, the ability to check themselves when they overstate or understate something. And that's, what I saw every single day working on these models is that they cannot decide the difference between a blog post and something that was peer reviewed. And in terms of...
That's what I mean. It takes a primary source, like what it actually concretely was, and it can turn that into something or aggregate something, it seems. And it's
for the most part, doesn't access primary sources.
Right.
So, a lot of what we do as historians is how do we get as close to the truth, as close to the first person witness testimony as we can? How do we get the most of the truth that we can get? And how do we tell a story accurately based on that truth? What I think AI does not do, and I don't know if it'll ever be able to do, is find those sources, because a lot of them are not digitized. They're not online. They're in a collection or in an archive in somebody's attic. It can't read cursive. It can try, but, there are still limitations to what these models can do with primary sources themselves. So, yeah, I really don't think that AI will take the job of historians, because so much of what we do is original research. It is, going to different archives with collections that aren't digitized. It's talking to archivists. It's talking to subject matter experts. It's interviewing family members. And, this is something that AI just cannot do.
Right. It would have to have access first and then do it justice. And so when you first started helping with these, evaluating these LLMs, did you feel like you were at least trying to make your knowledge accessible to people, or what was the motivation?
The motivation was, in part, making history more legible, more accessible, applying what I'd learned to a team setting. And a lot of what graduate work is working on your own and working in isolation. And so it was really cool to be a part of a team that was building something together and applying their knowledge in creative and innovative ways. And at the same time, it was just so demoralizing because so many people were fed up with the working conditions and the being taken advantage of for their knowledge.
What were the working conditions?
There were just limited benefits, minimal benefits and minimal pay for, it felt extractive. Like you were literally using my brain power to power these machines.
And you worked years to gain this knowledge, and it's just going to turn around and...
Exactly.
Okay. And you guys weren't fairly compensated for that?
No, not at all. Like I said, I can't really talk about all the details of it, but it wasn't and I don't think it's improved. I don't think it can improve the exploitative practices that are at the ground level of training these models.
Okay. And you were there a year and a half, and then said, I can't keep supporting this.
Yeah. I got an academic position after that. And so I was able to be a part of an intellectual community, which is like the goal, right? Like to be a part of an intellectual community, to teach my first solo class, Intro to Native American History. It was awesome. My class was incredible. My students were incredible. And yeah, I'm really thankful to be applying my research in that way. And then coming back to academia, I sort of was greeted with an anti-AI like hostility.
Yeah.
Not necessarily geared towards me, but towards these models that are, sorry, my stomach is like...
No, same. I think that it'll cancel out.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
an anti-AI hostility that was in reaction to, seeing student engagement drop off, seeing the quality of student papers and the intellectual curiosity of our students dropping off. So
effort to gain knowledge too, right? Like it takes effort to go do research and
Yes.
not just be given an answer.
Yes. And, all these studies are now coming out about, people who write using AI not being able to remember what they wrote because they didn't write it. So what does that mean for what you're learning in a classroom if you're supposed to be learning and you're not actually remembering anything that you wrote? I think the hostility is, founded.
Right.
I think it makes sense why so many people are skeptical of what these tools can do. Do I think it's really cool that so much information is now accessible to people? Yes. Do I think that information is also available on Google? Yes. You can do that work yourself more accurately than these models do them for you.
Or it allows you to develop some discernment, critical
Yes.
thinking, right?
Yes.
To question and to look and to pull things out. So what do you think people building the AI models and people who use AI in general understand the least about human knowledge? Some of it I think we may have just touched on of like requires some discernment, but what else do you think?
I definitely think it requires, using this technology requires discernment, it requires critical thinking, but I also think in a lot of ways it's sort of stripping us from separating ourselves from the process, which it can be helpful to write an email. It can be helpful to, I don't know, provide information on something that you didn't know about before. But I really believe that these are things that you can access from Google yourself. What the model is doing is it's taking its very limited in terms of, how expansive the internet is, limited access to, what it's been trained on, what sources it can pull from on the internet, and aggregating that information and spitting it out to you in a way that it wants you to receive it. Are all
Heavy
the
on
models,
it wants you to receive it.
Yeah. Some models are better than others. And this is all my, personal opinion, but also sort of what I work with in my job, but also, in future projects. I'm also a part of a team that's going to be doing some research on history and AI soon. So I think it requires critical thinking. I think it requires discernment. But I also want to encourage skepticism and pushing back on the models. I think after that first prompt and what you're given, the outputs become less and less trustworthy, in my opinion, because you're aggregating more and more information. Say you have like one chat and you ask another question in response to what the model gives you. The next response is not just an aggregate of information that's on the internet, it's an aggregate of the information that you've provided, and it just dilutes the substance with each chat. That's sort of how I envision it. It requires skepticism, AI skepticism.
I could see that. I mean, it does feel like the second question becomes a dependency on the first, and the third becomes a dependency on the second, and you move further away from the original question and reason that you asked it. So I could see that diluting history, actually.
But also so many people aren't, creating nuanced enough prompts to get the output that they actually want because the model is giving them something with that limited prompt. So like the more nuanced the prompts get, the more work the model has to do, which is helpful, but
so the more specific you are, you might get a better answer. But by the time you've asked it something so specific, you could have just taken that time to go look for it yourself.
Seriously.
Yeah.
And having spent so much time going on deep dives and like looking at where these models are failing, at the end of the day, it's not trustworthy enough for me anymore. It is no longer something that I, can
It's not the primary source.
It's not the primary source.
Okay.
And it's not close enough to the primary source for me to be able to trust it.
Mm-hmm. I love this message. So with that, you kind of, in teaching students how to get to the primary source, you've had students arriving without the ability to read cursive, which means they couldn't read original historical documents because most of them are written in cursive, right? So what did you do about that?
I have always loved cursive, and my mom used to tell me stories about how, she would write cursive in class and her teacher would come up to her with the ruler and tap her knuckles because she wasn't holding the pen correctly.
Oh.
And, my teachers never did that, but it was a skill that I admired in the people who are around me. And it's become so useful for me as a historian who studies the 19th century because there are so many handwritten documents that I have to learn how to read. There are some instances where I can't read some of the letters because it's
some of that cursive
several hundred years old penmanship, right?
Yeah.
Or the paper has deteriorated in quality. So, I had this exercise in my class where I was trying to teach treaties and indigenous treaties with the U.S. government. And I asked the students, can you open this treaty, find a treaty, read it, tell me what it's about? And I ran into some roadblocks because some students couldn't read it in the original cursive, which for, I want to say several decades, it's sort of been phased out in the U.S. as a skill that people are taught in elementary school and into high school. And so I'm, seeing the product of that phasing out at the college level. So I made a worksheet, sent it home with my students, got feedback from them and their parents the next class session.
What did the parents think about that?
Some were like, oh my gosh, you're learning this in college. And others were super enthusiastic. They're like, that's my favorite professor of yours. Like, I'm so glad you're learning this skill.
Did they think their kids had learned it and they didn't realize, oh, you never learned this? Because it's been ingrained in Boomer, Gen X, Millennial, like Gen Z might have been the first generation that they removed it from the curriculum in primary school, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure where the parents were coming from, but it was super exciting to see the students push themselves. And I was like, here's this assignment. It'll take you anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour. And I had a student come in after the assignment and say, like, one of my brightest students who was engaged every single class said, I struggled with this. It took me an hour and a half to do this.
Wow.
And it was just sort of, read this document, practice writing the letters yourself, transcribe this document as a historian would. This is sort of like an intro to paleography, like historical handwriting. And it was a great class activity, and I think the students really enjoyed it. But that's one of those things that I'm just not really afraid to teach. Like, this is an essential skill.
Yeah, how else are they going to remember history if they can't read it, right?
Exactly. I mean, yeah, I think, we're trying to get as close as we can to the lived experience of someone in the past. How much closer can you get than the tip of their pen, And if we're reading a word processed transcription, it is helpful in a lot of cases. Like, especially, I transcribe my documents when I upload them to my computer. It's helpful to sort of move it and then integrate it into your work. But I saw the handwriting myself. I've seen what an individual wrote on their worst day. I've seen that. I've seen the parts of the word that, the end of the quill starts shaking because, their hand is tired, or, like you get to know someone based on their handwriting and based on, what they say. And I think encouraging students to dig deeper and get to the most original point, the start of the conversation, right, is helpful to not just learning history, but being an effective citizen, being an effective friend. Like, how do we get to the start? How do we get to the most basic part of this conversation? Like, where do we meet?
I never stopped to think about it that way. I mean, obviously, I always thought that this is as close as you're going to get to their account. But even for you to say, like, you can see when the quill, like, when their hand is tired or where they're tired, maybe some emotion comes out in the style of their handwriting you're used to seeing. Like, that's fascinating. Wow, this is great. Love that. So as digital natives, your students face a different challenge. They've grown up in a world where images can be fabricated. And that's led to something you do in your class called the photograph test. So set me up. We have a few photographs here, but set me up for what you typically do in class with them and where does this come from?
So it all sort of started with a really striking picture that I had that I think stands on its own. I think it's a striking picture without qualifying it at all, without giving any sort of historical context. But I encourage the context, right? The context is important for telling a story, for understanding a problem, for understanding the start of a conflict, for the context is important, period. So do you want to show the image?
So we've
start
got three,
with
and
Geronimo.
we'll place them in the B-roll footage.
Cadillac.
So we've got Geronimo. We've got
Let's start.
I think we have two of Geronimo.
This one.
Two of Geronimo and one of Sitting Bull.
So this one I started the class with this one. On the first day of class.
With Geronimo and the Cadillac?
On the first day of class, I showed them this picture and I said, can you tell me which of these pictures is an archival document and which one is AI? This one is easy. But then the more time that you spend on the original document, the clearer it is. It is a photo of Geronimo driving a Cadillac. Him and his colleagues are in a combination of traditional attire as well as more modern attire. And then the AI-generated image is like a high-res, zoomed-in image of an indigenous man in a car that says Cadillac on the side. That's different than the portrait of Geronimo that's being painted in this archival document, which is, here is a full-size Cadillac in the early 20th century when cars are expensive and not necessarily accessible to everyone. Here's Geronimo driving one around. It also shows maybe like a cultural significance. There's someone in a full-length headdress, as well as somebody with a feather in their hair. And then I think that's Geronimo in the top hat.
Oh, he's in the top hat.
Driving the Cadillac.
Oh,
exactly.
Interesting.
And then in the AI-generated image, it's sort of a man in worn clothing driving a vehicle that says Cadillac on the side. It doesn't tell us anything about Geronimo. It doesn't tell us anything about the Cadillac. I would be curious if this is an accurate historical representation of what a Cadillac looked like in this time period. And if, a car expert would know that better than me. But I think, alongside each other, the AI-generated image just looks so stripped of detail and clarity. I think another really interesting one is the output in regards to, let's do the Sitting Bull one. So this is another one that I think the students really enjoyed. This was closer to the end of the semester as we were talking about the ghost dance in the 19th century and early 20th century. This prompt was based on an image of Sitting Bull and Buffalo Bill Cody. And Buffalo Bill Cody led these sort of touring shows that showed what the American frontier was like, what indigenous life was like. And Sitting Bull was a part of that. I believe it's Sitting Bull. And the AI-generated image, do you want to guess which one's AI-generated and which one's real?
See, I feel like I can tell simply because of the clarity of the photo for now. I think what concerns me and concerns a lot of people is that eventually the AI-generated output will be in the type of focus or blur or pixelated or whatever it is to mimic an old image, but it will be an AI-generated image. So right now, I could say, okay, the one on the right, the one, he has one feather above his head, that one's AI-generated simply because it's so clear. But once that becomes, once AI can replicate what an old photo looks like, quote unquote, what would you look for? I don't know that I would know.
But if you were scrolling Instagram and you didn't see them side by side, you only saw one image.
I would think that was an old photo that was what's the word, like made to look newer, like what refurbished, basically.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know. I don't know that I would know.
I think, stripped of the comparison to the original image,
Yeah.
it is believable. I didn't prompt any of these to come out in black and white. They came out in black and white. Or, I think
So it came out, so AI made it come out.
this one was in color. The Cadillac image came out in color, which
So
there
AI
wasn't
knew
color
enough to know if
photography.
I'm going to generate a historical image, I need to make it black and white,
Mhm.
which means it's also going to know eventually I'm going to make it look old. And so then what do you look for when
that's
it
what
gets
also
to that?
people are training the models to do, right?
Right.
When evaluators are looking at AI outputs to image prompts, which is something that we did, they are making a note. These are people who lived in the 19th century. This photo should be in black and white. And I also think, the danger, I keep seeing these AI historians and people who are going back to Pompeii or ancient Rome and all these other places, and they're telling a decontextualized, reductive story about the past that strips individuals of, their actual lives. And I think, their actual lived experiences. The image of, so this is, the prompt was generate an image of Buffalo Bill Cody and Sitting Bull. So the AI image has both of them sort of looking towards the camera. Buffalo Bill is wearing pretty nice clothes, it seems, a hat. He has a white goatee. Sitting Bull has 2 braids in his hair and 1 single feather in the back, looking straight towards the camera. Buffalo Bill looks very happy. Sitting Bull is sort of a neutral in expression. But then the original image is taken in like a studio.
So the original one was taken in a studio.
The original one appears to be taken in a studio. Sitting Bull is wearing a complete headdress, which has cultural significance to his community. Buffalo Bill is sort of posing, looking away from the camera, sort of intentionally, with his hand up on his shoulder. Sitting Bull is looking down, not necessarily engaged with the camera that's facing them. And I think it's so telling about their relationship and what can be perceived from the power dynamic at play.
Oh, okay.
Sitting Bull is not as engaged in the photography process as Buffalo Bill Cody.
In the original?
In the original, yeah. But
why would he not be as engaged?
Well, he's a part of this touring show to showcase Indigenous culture beyond the reservation, and it involved a lot of Indigenous people participating in it, and a lot of people saw value for their own communities in, they were making money, some money. They were sharing their culture with other communities. It's also received some criticism for being kind of paternalistic and...
Because at the end of the day, they're being exploited.
Exploitative. But for the individual who was participating in it, everybody had a different experience in the show. But, and I would encourage further research on Buffalo Bill Cody's show. But the point of this image is how little we can take from the AI generated image is just an image. It is a one-dimensional output based on a prompt. The original image is a result of personal experience, of personal decisions, of cultural notes, power dynamics. You could learn about the history of photography and photography studios.
Where would you see those things? Where would you see like the power dynamics? Because in the one on the right, it looks like they're kind of chummy.
Mm-hmm.
The one on the left, they're both looking off in the distance and they're not really leaning into each other much. Like, what would you point out in the original photo about the power dynamics?
I think it comes from the context, knowing that this is Buffalo Bill Cody. And
okay, so you'd have to know what he looked... Because
yes.
I would say that in the AI-generated one, he doesn't look like the one in the original. For those that are only listening in, the original one, he's got a dark mustache that curls up at the handlebar level, no goatee, shorter dark hair. Than in the AI-generated one, he looks like an actor. He looks like a movie actor. Long white goatee, long wavy white hair.
Colonel Sanders.
Colonel Sanders. He does
Yeah.
look like Colonel Sanders in the AI generated one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And Sitting Bull kind of looks like Sitting Bull. We have so many photographs of Sitting Bull.
Okay.
And so this kind of looks like him, but it doesn't at the same time. Okay, let's talk about this one of Geronimo, I think is also really striking. This one was the one that the students struggled with the most because it was being displayed on a projector screen.
Mm.
So they were all looking at it with that added, pixelization.
Mm-hmm.
And they struggled with this one because they're similar. The prompt was generate an image of Geronimo holding a rifle.
Mm. And it seems like it probably took, it aggregated from this original image.
Exactly.
Which, again, for those just listening, Geronimo is holding the base of the rifle in his right hand, the neck of the rifle in his left hand, and looking directly at the camera. And
in both images.
In both images. And that's pretty much the only, I guess, that's the overarching description for both images. But continue. What were you telling the students, or what were they struggling with?
Well, it was sort of, the class was split on this one. Which one was AI, which one was archive. And, I see where it caught them up because this is a very highly cited, highly referenced image of Geronimo. This is after his capture, after, Geronimo is known as, quote, the last chief of the Apache, but he was not necessarily a chief. He was a leader along with other people, and they were evading the U.S. Army for decades, or for a long time. Take out decades. That might not be historically correct. It's for a long time.
For a while, yeah.
Geronimo and the band that accompanied him of Apache peoples were evading the U.S. Army in Texas by moving in and out of Texas, Mexico, and other southwestern states. So this photograph is taken, I believe, after he is caught. So he is currently in U.S. Army captivity when this image on the original image is taken. It looks like it could be a studio or some sort of set or, a really well-framed picture outside. He is on one knee, holding the rifle in sort of tattered clothes. It seems like he has been on the run for a while. In the other image, it's similar. The background is blurry. It looks a lot more aesthetically pleasing, a lot more detailed than the original image. But if you were to see this image, he's sort of standing, not kneeling. You don't see if you want to read power dynamics into this image, he's sort of he looks staged in the original image.
The original image looks staged, like you said, but he also looks way more angry than he does in the AI generated one. Which, to your point, if he's a prisoner of war or he's captured, he's in captivity, I'd be pissed too.
Exactly. I mean, after spending years evading,
and now you're making me take a photo,
right? And you miss that. From the AI generated image. And so the point of this assignment or of this in-class activity isn't necessarily to say, all AI outputs are bad, all AI image outputs are negative. Some of them are getting really close to original images, but you miss all of the context. All you're getting is a one-dimensional image. You're getting a flat image based on code, based on a prompt, based on uncited materials that the model has been given or has access to on the internet. And it's not telling an accurate story about the past. The goal here was to encourage AI skepticism and also prove to the students that they do have the skills to discern what is AI and what is not.
Wow. That's so powerful. I bet they were themselves surprised at their own inability to figure out which was which or how to tell, right?
Yeah, I mean, I want to give them credit because a lot of them could tell, right? And they were the generation that was they were the generation that was raised with it. I tried to draw a parallel between something that we talked about in class, a really important moment in history that was, it rippled out. It affected people who were, teenagers at the time. It was one of those foundational moments for them in the past. And I asked the students, what is one of those moments for you guys? I know for some generations, it's 9/11. For some generations, it's Columbine or Sandy Hook, like
right.
these huge moments that affect not just the individual, tragic moments
Right.
that affect not just the individual, but the community. And one of the students said COVID-19, the pandemic, which makes sense.
Yeah.
They were in, elementary school, high school at the time.
Right.
Another student said the launch of ChatGPT. And I was like, okay, I was an adult during this time period. How
Right.
do we have some empathy for my students here? And so this was my attempt to meet them there and say,
Right.
like, I know that your generation was raised with this, ominous thing on the horizon that was going to take your jobs, take your livelihood, but you do have the skills to not just
Outsmart it, basically.
not just outsmart it, to do better. To
Mm.
make something that's more tangible, that has more of an impact, that is, a part of the human experience. ChatGPT isn't going to take your humanity
Ooh,
unless
yeah.
you let it, unless you
bar.
start leaning on it.
Yeah.
There are things it can help you with, for sure.
Yeah.
But you have to continue to believe that you're smarter and continue to ground yourself in the curiosity and the AI skepticism and, using the things that make us human to prove to yourself that you're smarter than this, like you can do this.
That's so empowering of you.
Mhm.
What's at stake if we lose the ability to tell the difference?
I think we're already seeing the impact of
It's a heavy question, I know.
Yeah, we're already seeing the impact of AI on, retention and critical thinking and writing quality. I think that's obvious in a lot of ways. I think I'm sort of worried for fear becoming the thing that stops us from moving, stops us from asking questions, stops us from sharing our opinion, stops us from being in community with other people. I also think, over-reliance on technologies like ChatGPT that are aggregates, not just ChatGPT, LLMs more broadly, that are aggregates of information. We lose touch with that primary source. We lose touch with what the truth actually is because all we're working with is summaries. All we're working with is abbreviations and a drop in, like, ChatGPT sort of LLMs build this illusion of all of the answers being at our fingertips. And that's just not how life works. That's not how my discipline in history works. You leave often with more questions than answers. But living in that, having that balance of knowing, like, I can find truth, I can look for truth, I can find an answer. Does that answer come with a lot of other questions? Yes. But what I think the danger of believing that LLMs can give you the complete answer, I just think it homogenizes our way of thinking. It makes us complacent. It makes us uncurious. And I think all of those things, in addition to lack of retention and lack of actual learning, separate us from what it means, like the true values of being a human, of enjoying the world, beyond touching grass. It's about, like, remembering your experiences and having experiences with intention and an open heart and open mind. If we're only sort of living from that homogenized way of thinking,
We become just like it.
we become just like it. It limits us as individuals. And so I see the benefits of LLMs. I see the benefits of AI models to help us do things. But I also recognize that it also comes with limitations. And these limitations aren't minor. These limitations are big, There are factual inaccuracies. There are restrictions on which materials these models can reference. And all of those things combined, when we become satisfied with the summary.
And we don't continue to question and don't continue to maintain curiosity.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think it limits
incredible
us.
work that you're doing, honestly. I have to pay you respect because you're not just sharing information and you're not just sharing history. You really are training the next generation to look for the truth.
Mhm.
So I really credit you for that. Switching gears just a little bit. So while you were, on this steady journey to eventually become the lecturer that you are now, you were also Miss Belize Beauty
Oh my
runner-up
gosh.
in 2022. Yeah, we're switching a gear heavily right now. And you write on Substack for OneOneCocoa. I want to know the full picture of who you are
Mhm.
outside of just the PhD, which is actually obviously massive. I don't want to discredit that, but talk to me about those parts of your life. What made you want to run in the Miss Belize Beauty pageant?
There's a long history of pageantry in Belize. It's sort of like a legacy of being a British colony and defining ourselves as a new nation. There are local pageants and national ones that are important to us as a country that we all get behind. But also representation is so limited. We're such a small country, and I thought it would be a really cool way to reintroduce myself to my country because at that point I had been in the States for 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
So, visiting once or twice a year, my whole family was still there. It's still very much a part of who I am as a person to be a Belizean woman in the States. And I thought that this is going to be a cool way to give back to that community and say, if you need representation, I feel like I am a good representation of what it means to be, a strong, wonderful Belizean person.
Mm.
And, in part, I wanted to contribute. I wanted to say, I'm offering my services if that's needed. But my dad said, just go, have fun, show up as yourself. And I think I did that. I went up for Miss Universe Belize in 2022.
Mm.
I bought my dress on a credit card at David's Bridal at the Arboretum in Austin. And, $500 paid off eventually.
And you made it look good.
And I made it look good. I, had lined it up with a bunch of photographers from Belize so that, when I got there for pageant week, I was able to collaborate with them and see their creativity on display, which is so cool because these are, Belizean artists that I've known for more than a decade, grew up with a lot of them, and
how cool.
was able to work with them again as an adult. It was exhilarating before the pageant even started to be able to collaborate with Quills and Monica and Ernie and all of these photographers, but also Kaj, who makes jewelry, a Belizean artist who makes jewelry. She provided a bunch of her materials for me to wear during pageant week. And so these are just people who I admire, who I think are really awesome, and I was able to highlight them and collaborate with them. During pageant week, I don't think I had a set focus on what, my story was going to be or my passion that I was going to advocate for. It was generally just
You.
I'm just going to be myself.
Yeah.
I'm going to present, the things, which isn't in pageantry. That's not the most strategic thing to do because the judges are sort of looking for a focused perspective. But I also just thought it was going to be a cool opportunity. The hardest part was the critiques of my body and my
really?
appearance. I think it was like all of the negative things that had impacted me, the negative self-talk was sort of
Coming back at you.
it was like personified in
Oh, wow.
Facebook comments and responses to the live streams, or people commenting not on my posts but on another person who was competing for the title's post, after a few days of preparing for the pageant, the voices started getting louder and louder for not just myself. I could feel it with my peers. And that element of it was something that really affected the next couple years, right? So yeah, it was really hard to shake those voices after the fact.
With those it's kind of, I would think it's kind of like exposure therapy. You go through a period where it's really hard because you're dealing with your own, voice questioning yourself. Then, like you said, you're seeing it personified. Was there a point where you just went into don't give a fuck, I'm past that. I've had enough exposure to it. I know who I am. Like, did that take time?
I wouldn't call it therapy. It just sort of felt like jumping into the deep end of the pool and not knowing how to swim and just sort of like trying to survive in the moment. I think in the years since, I've sort of gone through the different emotions and tried to process it. More recently, I've come into this space where I just want to show up as myself. I want to show up completely and honestly and be as honest about who I am, period. One way that I do that is about being honest about my passion for history, my passion for teaching, my passion for learning, and my passion for writing. So I created OneOneCocoa, which we can talk about later.
But we can do it now.
I created OneOneCocoa because I wanted an outlet that was historical.
And this is your Substack.
This is my Substack. It is historically grounded. It's also sort of bridges history and creative writing and my connection to Belize and the sort of founding texts for myself, as well as things that I'm curious about, and sort of encouraging that curiosity, encouraging that attention to the details and the different things that make up our collective past, right? Because it's not just about text documents. There's images, there's music, there's photography. There are all these different elements that make us who we are. And I think all of them are worthy of exploration, worthy of curiosity. And I think as Belizeans, people who are from such a small place that is so local, and there are so many cultural nuances that are not necessarily applicable outside of Belize. But part of what this space was going to give me was the opportunity to talk about it and give it attention, give it relevance.
The pageant and the Substack is a platform to share.
Like, how do we, tell ourselves that we're worth it? We're not just a small country. We're able to impact the world within our borders, which I think is so important. And it starts with teaching us that we're worth it, because, violence is really high in Belize, crime is really high, and poverty is really high. And I think by teaching Belizeans, by teaching people outside of Belize that we're worth it, that we deserve to invest in ourselves, that we deserve to talk about ourselves with value, not just talking about, the negative things that we do tell ourselves. These are, important things to acknowledge, but also it's worth it to talk about Belizean music artist Andy Palacio, who is so important to so many Belizeans as a Garifuna artist, as somebody who was able to stake a claim to his ancestry. And so, Garifuna peoples are an Afro-Indigenous community in Central America and the Caribbean. And Andy Palacio looked at the state of his community and said, nobody can speak the original language. I am going to write an entire album exclusively in this language. And it became the most popular album in Belize that year, in 2007. It was sort of like a canon event for me, watching his claim to not just culture, not just language, but carving out a space for his artistry and his people in the present moment. And now 2007 is in the past, but also making active investments towards his community's future. Because now here is this beautiful piece of art that we can now look back to and say, okay, here is the Garifuna language. Here it is.
Right.
It's relevant then, it's relevant now, and it will be relevant to future generations. So if I can step into that shadow, if I can get something from those sort of intentional, creative, and historical acts, that's where I've landed. I've landed in wanting to wanting to work towards that, in that legacy.
Yeah. Okay. So, by the way, commenting on your Substack, for those that are interested in following Dr. Alina Scott's work on history of Belize, AI, the truth, and all of the goodness that she writes in her Substack, OneOneCocoa, we will place the link in the bio below. So with that, with what you're doing with history, with your passion for Belize history, with the platform that you use with the Miss Belize beauty pageant, it is eventually, from what I understand, a goal of yours to open a Belize History Institute, right? What does that look like?
It's since finishing the PhD, I have been able to dream in a way that I hadn't before, because I was so hyper focused on this one goal that I was working towards. And so I think in the long term, I'd like to develop some sort of process or institute or organization that uplifts Belizeans and Belizean history. The University of Belize actually just relaunched their history department and history major. So that's super exciting. I'm hoping to talk to more people at UB about that. But I think, especially in the age of AI, and I think this is the argument that more history departments need to be making, these skills, the contextualization skills, the curiosity, these are skills that are embedded in the discipline of history. Not just, history as this thing that happened in the past, but in the methodology that historians apply, that historians teach in the classroom, in the quest to find the primary source. These are things that we do really well as historians that are becoming increasingly valuable in the age of AI, when the water is just increasingly murky. Muddy waters on the internet these days.
Trying to see clearly, yeah.
Exactly. And I think historians and people who study the past with an openness to learn, I think those skills are going to become even more valuable in the next few decades.
Well, I hope you achieve that goal. That would be really cool.
It would be really cool, wouldn't it?
Final question.
Alrighty.
As someone highly recommended, what's one recommendation you'd like to leave with those watching and listening?
I would recommend to never put yourself in a box, intellectually, physically, creatively, to push yourself. Once you get to that point of discomfort in not knowing something, you're in the sweet spot. Push yourself even more. If you fail, and this is something that I'm teaching myself continually, if you fail, try it again. If you're not good at something, keep trying, because it is possible to become better. It is possible to, even if you never become better at a skill or a creative outlet, to still find joy in that process and to get something from that experience. There is value in pushing yourself and asking hard questions of yourself.
Oh, I really love when you said that you're in the sweet spot. It's like that, that guy that's mining for diamonds and he's an inch away and he walks away versus the one that keeps going and gets it. It's that discomfort. Yeah, you're so right about that. Well, Dr. Alina Scott, thank you so much for coming on today. I genuinely respect so much the work that you're doing, and I feel like it's so interesting to learn about what's made you who you are and what's built that passion and all the different areas of your life that you've explored and continue to explore. So really great having you on today. Thank you. Thank you for coming, and thank you for the work that you do.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This was really wonderful.
I met Alina on a boat through a mutual friend almost 4 years ago. I had no idea then that she was building something this important. But that's exactly the point. If this conversation meant something to you, share it, and then go start one of your own. Talk to someone unexpected. Ask a question you normally wouldn't. You have no idea what story is sitting right next to you. I'm Becky Perry. This is The Highly Recommended.